Mr. Barker, go ahead.
Nick, just before the break, we were going over the Leica and going through your testimony a little bit. I want to go back to a couple questions I forgot to ask you. Do you recall, before the shooter shot Colin or Nick, did he say anything?
I don't recall him saying anything.
All right.
No.
And before he shot you, do you recall hearing him say anything to you?
No, I did not.
Yes.
Nick, I'm handing you what's been marked as exhibits 192, 193. Just indicate if you recognize what's depicted in those exhibits.
I do.
All right. In 192, 193, what does that depict, or what do you recognize about it?
I'm sorry, which one?
192, 193. There should be a green label behind them. Sorry.
Oh, right. Okay. That was the necklace that I was wearing that night.
All right. In both 192 and 193?
The 193 was the chain for the necklace, and then 192 was a pendant with my grandfather's ashes in it.
Okay.
That I owned.
And 310, do you recognize what's in 310?
Yes, I do. That's the bullet hole through my neck.
All right. Move to admit 192, 193, and 310 at this time.
No objection on 192, 193. Object to 310 based on Rule 403.
Objections noted. 192, 193, and 310 will be admitted.
First published, Judge.
Go ahead.
Let me show you first what's been admitted as 192. There we go. See that, Nick?
I do.
Okay. So just describe for the jury what we're looking at.
That was a pendant that I wore with a silver chain, and I wore it because it contained my grandfather's ashes in it.
All right. Did it have another part to it that's not depicted in 192?
The chain.
Okay.
Yes.
And let's go to that. Next, exhibit 193. What are we looking at here?
That would be the chain that goes with the pendant.
Do you recall when those came off your neck, the pendant and the chain?
I don't recall, but I thought that it was when I got shot.
All right. Do you recall wearing it that night?
I do. I was wearing it that night.
Now let me go to what's been admitted as exhibit 310. What are we looking at here, Nick?
That's the bullet wound in my neck.
All right. Can you identify, if you can, where the entrance wound would be?
The front of the neck.
Sorry, do you have that laser pointer? If you could use that again, thank you.
It went in right here, and it went out right here.
Okay, and it looks like there's a laceration, a linear laceration across. Do you know what that's from?
Well, I didn't, but my guess was that when the bullet
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation.
exited,
Just a second, please.
Lack of foundation, speculation.
Sustained. We need to lay more foundation.
Nick, you described earlier wearing a chain around your neck. Do you know if you had that chain on when you reached the hospital?
I wasn't sure. By the time I got to the hospital and they were taking off all my clothes, I realized I didn't have the chain.
Okay. And can you identify a linear mark on your neck? On Exhibit 310.
Yeah, right here.
All right. Is that consistent with the placement of the chain on your neck when you would be wearing it?
Yes, it was.
Let me follow up on that injury a little bit. Do you recall what treatment you received at the hospital?
Yes, I do.
Describe that.
They brought me in, cleaned out the wound. A doctor gave me a few stitches. He told me he couldn't do it too tight or it would get infected. The doctor also told me that I didn't need any antibiotics because the wound was cauterized and the bullet was still hot when it went through me.
How long were you at the hospital? Do you recall?
That night, they discharged me that early morning of October 9th.
Okay. Did you have any follow-up visits with any other doctors regarding that wound?
I did.
Your Honor, relevance.
Serious physical injury, Judge.
Already been established.
Well,
Approach, please.
regarding that injury, have you had any lasting impairment to either muscle or nerve because of that?
I have.
All right, can you describe that, please?
Yeah, my spinal accessory nerve was damaged. They had to do emergency surgery around 2 weeks after the incident and reconnect the nerves going from my trap to my neck.
Today, do you have any lasting effects from that?
I do. It's been a year and a half. I still have trouble moving my left arm around. The first year to year and a half, my shoulder could bring my arm up to about here, but my trap wasn't firing and I couldn't lift my arm any higher than what my shoulder could bring it to because of my injury.
All right, thank you. May I have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
Sorry, Nick, one thing I forgot to ask you. Let me go back a little bit.
Sure.
Do you recall how tall you were at the time of this incident?
About 5'9",
Okay. How tall are you now?
5'9.5".
All right. So you've grown a little bit.
Yeah.
And how much did you weigh at the time? Do you recall?
Probably around 160 pounds.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Davidson.
If I understood your testimony correctly, you were standing over by the grass area near the parking lot to the courtyard when your attention was first directed towards the parking lot across the street,
Correct.
and there was a flashlight or a light, correct?
Correct, a flashlight.
And you indicated in your testimony earlier that the light scanned the Mountain View parking lot area, correct?
It seemed to be moving around, yes.
And then you said it scanned over by the courtyard area, correct?
In that general or area, moving around, yeah.
And then after scanning courtyard area, it was scanning in the street area, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then it was after scanning those areas, you testified to that the light shined on you, correct?
While it was scanning, it shined on me.
You're still across the street at this point, right?
Correct.
In other words, you're on the courtyard side of Franklin.
More or less, yes.
Well, you are not, north of Franklin.
North of Franklin, meaning how far?
Are you on the street or are you north of the street? There's a curb there, right?
Correct.
Which side of the curb are you on?
The street side.
So you're in the street at this point.
Watching, yes.
Okay. How far in the street are you when you're watching the flashlight scanning around?
I want to say about, not too sure, but I think about halfway, maybe a little less than that, is when I first noticed it.
So your testimony today is that you were standing in the middle of the street when you noticed the flashlight.
To the best of my knowledge, yes, it's around where I
And of
saw
course,
the
that would,
flashlight.
and of course, that would put you closer to what you were watching and put you in a better position to see it and describe it, right?
Well, it was really hard to see because of the light.
So the closer you are, the better you can see, right?
I wouldn't agree to that. The flashlight was very bright. It was very hard to see as I got closer.
So why is your testimony then today that you're in the middle of the street watching this, but when you talked to the police at the hospital, you were across you were on the other side of the street?
The other side of the street, meaning on the sidewalk. Is that what you mean?
Well, didn't you tell the police that you were on the courtyard side of Franklin when you saw all this?
I believe so. Yeah.
Can we bring up 316, please? You still have your pointer up there, sir?
I do.
I want to go through a couple of the images that we looked at and clarify where exactly it was you indicated you were and what you saw. You want them inside the parking lot? you have your pointer up there?
I do.
This would be the entrance to the parking lot, correct?
Correct.
And this is where basically the only place you can get in or out of the parking lot from Franklin Avenue.
I don't think so. I think there's another entrance to the left over here, but it's further down.
All the way at the end of the parking lot.
Correct.
And I think when you showed us earlier where you saw Mr. Peering and Mr. Brew, it wasn't in this portion of the area, correct?
I don't recall.
Okay. Could we pan over to where the... Stop and back up. Right there? Can you show us again where it was that you believe you saw Stephen when you first had the flashlight?
I can't tell you from this picture.
Which way do we have to go?
To where from the camera view, behind the camera.
Can you see the place now where you first saw Stephen with the light?
I think that's facing a little too far to the left, maybe a little more to the right, around the middle of that area there. It's kind of hard to see, but
Show us what the light
around like this area, so in the middle of the parking lot, there's parking spots here in the middle, and then over on the other side, and it was coming from the middle area.
So you saw him essentially in the area where that police SUV is, or just behind it?
I want to say behind, around it. I'm not too sure. I don't recall.
And then if we flip around, can you show us where Mr. Brew and Mr. Peering were when you saw them injured in the corner of the parking lot?
Well, after they got shot,
Where were they when you ran up?
Colin was on the ground, and Perrin was on the ground around right here, about 5 feet from Colin.
And you claimed in your testimony before that you actually saw Mr. Jones fire the weapon at Colin, correct?
I heard and watched the shooting. Yes, I did.
Specifically with regard to Mr. Brew. It's your testimony that you saw Mr. Jones fire his gun and hit Mr. Brew, correct?
Yes, I saw Mr. Jones shoot Colin Brew.
And then you further testified that you saw Mr. Peering jump up and then get shot in midair, correct?
Correct.
And that it appeared that Mr. Peering was trying to dodge bullets in the middle of the air, correct?
Pretty much just startled, kind of a jump of, trying to get out of the way, or maybe he startled, so he got a little jumpy, but he was in midair when he got shot.
So show me, please, if you could, with your laser, where Mr. Jones was when you saw these bullets being fired at Mr. Brew and then at Mr. Peering.
You're about 10 in this area right here.
Okay, so you're referencing to the area basically just north of the second parking stall from the corner?
Correct, kind of by the corner over here, the bottom left corner.
Okay. Now, when you run over and you observe Mr. Brew and Mr. Peering and Mr. Jones and what you just described, is Mr. Acevedo there already?
When I ran up to Colin, Nick Acevedo was behind me and next to me holding Colin with me.
You arrived at that location at about the same time with Mr. Acevedo, is that correct?
I don't recall.
Well, when was the first time you saw Mr. Acevedo?
When I was holding Colin.
How long after you started holding Colin did you see Mr. Acevedo?
I don't recall. It could have been a few seconds. It could have been 10. I don't recall.
You believe he was right behind you when you ran up, though?
I don't know. I don't know where he was. I didn't see him at all before that.
So you don't know where it was prior to that?
Correct.
Okay. You didn't see Mr. Acevedo at all from the time you exited from the courtyard parking lot till the time you saw him holding Mr. Brew on the ground?
No, I didn't even see him at the party, and it was his house that we were at.
Okay. Did you recognize any of the people who were there after the shooting?
After the shooting?
Yes.
No, I ran away after the shooting.
Thank you. You can take that off. There were other members of your fraternity at the party, correct?
Correct.
You know who Michael Mullen is, correct?
I do.
He's in your fraternity, right?
Right.
And he was at the party,
He was.
and he was also in the parking lot when this all happened, wasn't he?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall hearing a voice that you said sounded like his?
I do, but then I remember saying that it could have been because it sounded like to me. It could have been anyone's voice.
All right. Well, let's go through that statement then. Now, when you were taken to the hospital, you were contacted by the police, correct?
Right when I got there, a detective talked to me and was questioning me as I was getting treatment to my neck.
You answered the detective's questions, right?
Correct.
One of the things that you told this jury earlier today is that you had never before been hit with a light that bright.
Correct.
So fair to say it was the brightest light that had ever been shined in your direction,
That's right.
and that you were halfway across the street at the time, correct?
Can you restate that?
I'm asking if that's what you said, that you were halfway across the street at the time the light was,
Correct.
okay? And you were blinded by it.
Correct.
Blinded meaning that your ability to see is impaired or non-existent, right?
Correct. My vision was impaired when the light was on me.
You couldn't see because you were blinded by the light, correct?
Correct.
And this memorable event of having the brightest light you've ever seen shined in your face to the point where it blinds you was something that you didn't even mention to the police, did you?
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
You didn't mention that to the police at the hospital, did you?
I don't recall that. I believe I did. I had just gotten shot.
Just a second, there's
So-
a question before you, sir.
May I approach the witness with Exhibit 75?
Yes.
You reviewed the transcript of your interview at the hospital, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
It's actually in two parts, right?
Correct.
And I believe that two parts of the interview may be in reverse order, but please take 75, look through it, and let me know if those are transcripts from your hospital interview.
Just give me a second.
Sure.
Yeah, it's all here.
Would you agree with me that the initial or the first part of the interview is actually in the second section of that exhibit,
What page would that be?
wherever the first page is after the divider in the middle?
Oh, yes.
And you see right there in the first page where you describe the light on lines 19 and 20?
On the first page?
Yes, first page of the initial interview.
No, I do not.
If you'd like to show them, go ahead, Mr.
Sure.
Hanson.
I apologize. Somebody took these.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Look at the first page of the first interview.
Yeah.
Okay. Lines 19 through 20. You tell the police, from my point of view, I was across the street and a guy was shining a very, very bright flashlight at the Mountain View parking lot. Is that what you said to the police?
Correct.
You didn't say anything to the police about the light being shined at the courtyard, correct?
Correct.
You didn't say anything to the police about the light being shined in the street, did you?
Well, what I meant was
My
I
question,
never.
sir, is in this transcript, did you say anything to the police about the light being shined at the street?
No, I did not.
Did you say anything to the police about the light being shined in your face and blinding you?
No, I did not.
Did you, in fact, say anything to the police at all about the light even being shined in your general direction?
I believe I did.
Well, show me what page it's on.
In this interview, no.
That's what I'm asking about, this interview.
Oh, you didn't specify. I'm sorry. No, I did not in this interview.
You had a subsequent interview, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And that was about 4 days later?
Yeah.
And Mr. Barker, Mr. Shea, and Detective O'Hagan, and your mom were there, correct?
Correct.
And before you even started that interview, you had a whole thing typed out, a narrative that you had written, correct?
Correct.
And let me guess, you did that all by yourself without conferring with any of your other fraternity brothers, right?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. I want to ask you about this interview before you had that second interview 4 days later. You didn't tell the police anything about the light being shined in your direction, did you?
Not in this interview, no.
You also told the police that you were across the street at the time the light was being shined, correct?
Correct.
Your testimony today is essentially that you saw the light moved around, the light was shining on Colin and Nick Peering, and then you saw Colin get shot, correct?
According to the statement, yes.
I'm not asking you what your statement is, I'm asking you what your testimony was this morning. Is that what you testified to this morning?
Yes.
Okay. And then after Colin was shot, Nick jumps up and he's shot in midair, correct?
Correct.
You didn't describe any of that to the police either, did you?
There was a lot I left out in that interview because of my state
Including
of
what I
mind.
just described, right? You didn't tell any of that to the police, did you?
No, I did not.
In fact, you described the incident to the police without ever seeing these guys get shot, didn't you?
No, I did not.
Well, let's take a look. Didn't you tell the police that you heard shots and then you looked?
On what page?
I'm asking you if you recall saying that.
It's been a long time. I really don't.
Okay. Please look at page 3. Lines 5 through 6. It was hard to make out. Once I heard the gunshots, of course, I was looking over there to see what the hell happened. That's what you told the police, correct?
Correct.
And then you go on to explain, 2 of my friends were on the ground, Nick Peering and Colin Brew. I ran over to Colin because I saw that he was bleeding from about his torso to his chest. His whole shirt was covered in blood. I ran over to him. I grabbed him by the head. I was trying to see if he was alive, trying to talk to him or something. Next thing I know, I hear another gunshot. I feel it on my neck. I start holding my neck. I start kind of jogging, running away. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
And that's what you told the police on October 9th of 2015, correct?
Yes, I did.
You'd agree with me that in this description you provided details about Colin's appearance, correct?
To the extent of his bleeding, yes.
You provided you provided a description about how you were holding him, correct?
Correct.
You provided a description about why you were holding him, in other words, to see if he was alive, correct?
Correct.
But you didn't say anything about seeing him get shot, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't say anything about seeing Nick Peering flying through the air, correct?
Not in this interview, no.
That's what I'm asking you about, this interview, correct?
Correct.
You didn't say anything to the police on October 9th, 2015 about the light being shined on Colin Brew before Colin was shot, did you?
I don't recall.
Well, take a look and let me know if it's in there.
No, it's not in here.
Similarly, you didn't say anything to the police on October 9th, 2015 about seeing the light shined on Nicholas Peering before Mr. Peering was injured, correct?
Correct.
very first time that you were able to see Mr. Jones was after you approached Colin and held him, correct?
Can you restate that?
The very first time you were able to see Mr. Jones was after you approached Colin and you held him, correct?
I don't believe so.
So you were able to see, and by see I mean make out and be able to describe what he looked like.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
No, the flashlight was on. I could not tell who he was until I turned around and saw him screaming on his knees, reaching for his gun.
On his knees or on his back?
I don't recall. It was either one.
Well, didn't you testify this morning that he was on his knees?
I said sitting down and maybe the knees. I wasn't looking at his lower body. I was looking at his face.
But didn't you tell the police that he was laying on his back?
I don't recall.
Okay. You'd agree with me that it's...
I was very traumatized.
You would agree with me that it's much easier for one to retrieve a gun from the rear of their waist if they're sitting up versus if they're lying on their back?
I don't understand your question.
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. So you hadn't been able to really look and see what Stephen looked like until after you're there and you're holding Colin, correct?
After I held Colin, I turned around and looked at the shooter, yes.
That's the first time you saw him, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you say that you were kneeling next to Colin, or you were crouching? How were you doing that?
I was, do you want me to demonstrate?
No, just describe for me, please. Were you kneeling?
I was kneeling. I was behind him. I was holding him up. I was shaking him too, holding his head, looking into his eyes, just trying to talk to him, or I don't know.
My question, though, is in terms of your body position when you're holding him. You said you were kneeling. Is that right?
I don't recall my body positioning.
Were your knees on the ground?
I don't recall.
You weren't standing up, though.
I don't think I was.
You couldn't have been standing up if you were holding him from behind, right?
Right.
Okay, so you weren't standing. Can we agree on that?
I don't believe I was.
Okay. And then your testimony this morning was that you got up from either your kneeling or crouching position, correct?
Correct.
You turned around because your back was to Stephen at that point, correct?
Correct.
And you took a couple of steps in his direction, correct?
Correct.
And your testimony this morning was that he then recovered a gun from the back of his waistband, correct?
Correct.
And he pointed it at you, correct?
Yes.
And you looked down the barrel, correct?
Yes.
You can't recall if the light was on or not, correct?
I don't believe it was on. He might have turned it off after he shot Colin and Nick when he
You couldn't
put
recall
it.
this morning if the light was on or not, correct?
I cannot recall.
Okay. And then he shoots you, correct?
Yes.
That's not the account that you gave the police on October 9th, though, is it?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm referring to the statement you gave at the police department right after all this stuff happened. That's not how you described it to them, is it?
Well, there's a few things I left out due to my mental state, considering I just watched my friend get shot, and two of my friends get shot, and me as well. I was a little traumatized, so I forgot a few things. But as my memory got improved over the time that I've had to think about it and reflect on it, I think I have a better recollection now than that night when I was in shock.
So the answer then is no, you did not say that to the police?
No, I did not.
Okay. In fact, what you described to the police is that you only got a glimpse of Mr. Jones, correct?
Correct.
You told the police you only looked at him for a glimpse second, and then you got shot, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it's not that you left it out, you just described it as a glimpse when you talked to the police, correct?
Felt like a couple seconds.
You didn't describe it as a couple seconds to the police, did you?
No.
You described it as a glimpse, and then you later described it as a glimpse second, correct?
Right. Meaning that couple seconds went by.
You didn't
By
say a couple
glimpse.
seconds to the police, did you?
No, I did not.
Okay. So the only words you used to describe the amount of time that passed as you were able to look at Stephen were glimpse and glimpse second. True?
True, sir.
After you were shot and you ran, Stephen was still on the ground, correct?
I'm not sure. I don't recall. I didn't see Steven after I got shot.
Well, when he shot the bullet that you say struck your neck, he was still either on his back or sitting up or kneeling, depending on what you recall, correct?
I don't recall. Right when I felt the bullet hit my neck, I immediately turned to run the other way.
Okay. You told us before that you were looking down the barrel of the gun before you were shot, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm asking you whether or not Stephen was standing at that very moment before the shot was fired.
I believe he was standing.
So he was standing up.
I really don't recall. From my knowledge, it looked like there were people around him. Looked like he was either sitting or on his knees. It looked like there were people around him trying to take the gun or restrain him or keep him from shooting someone else. And all I remember was seeing the face of Stephen Jones for a few seconds screaming and not standing up.
This morning, when you were asked about that moment, you said Stephen was sitting or kneeling. Wasn't that your testimony this morning?
Yes, it was.
And now you're telling us it's possible he was also standing at that point?
I don't recall him standing at that point.
So you never saw him standing, did you?
I knew he was standing initially in the parking lot because the light was moving, so obviously someone had to be walking with that light for the light to be moving like that.
Well, let's go back to my question. My question wasn't whether you could deduce he was standing because he was moving. My question was whether you actually ever saw him standing to the point where you were able to identify him at that point. You told us before that you couldn't because the light was on, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you never saw Stephen standing, did you?
I don't recall.
Okay. It's difficult to estimate how tall someone is. Say they're about 6 feet tall if you don't see the person standing up, isn't it?
Well, I did see him standing at one point in the parking lot. The initial walk over to Colin and Nick, he was standing. I could tell how tall he was.
Didn't you just tell this jury a few moments ago that it wasn't until after you were cradling your friend and you turned around that was the first time you were able to see Mr. Jones?
Identify and actually be able to look at his facial features, but before the light was bright and I just saw a shadow of a guy, but he was walking, he was standing up, and he was shining the light at Colin and Nick. I think you're confusing the time that the light got shined on me with the time that the light got shined on Colin and Peering, because it was on them first, and then what I meant by scan was that he shined it around the area. It was probably on multiple people, not just me for a second. So the light was on me for a second. It did blind me, and I remember that. I just don't really know where Stephen was after he shot me.
Okay. Let's go back to my question, though, because I'm not really asking you about what happened before the shots were fired, am I?
Okay.
Okay. Did you or did you not testify to this jury before that it wasn't until after Colin was shot and you ran up and you were supporting his back or his head and you then turned around that was the first time you were actually able to see what Stephen looked like?
Correct.
And in fact, when the police contacted you at the hospital, right there on page 3, and they asked you to describe who was referred to as the shooter at that point, you said, no, it was a bright flashlight, correct?
Where is that?
Page 3, line 3.
Page 3, line 3. I'm not sure when that was in the timeline.
That's what you said to the police, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's move on. You just testified a moment ago about people trying to restrain or keep Stephen from shooting anybody else?
Correct. It looked like they were trying
Yes or no,
to.
sir?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And your testimony this morning was that there were 1 to 3 people doing that, correct?
To my knowledge, it's a rough estimate.
Well, that was your rough estimate this morning, wasn't it? 1 to 3?
Yes, it was.
And they were trying to physically restrain him, correct?
Correct.
And from your perspective, it appeared that they were actively trying to prevent him from shooting anybody else, right?
That's correct.
So he has multiple people restraining him, trying to prevent him from firing his gun again, correct?
Correct.
And it's your testimony that it's under these circumstances that he either sits up or he's kneeling, recovers the gun from behind his back, points it at you, and then fires the gun, correct?
Correct.
Now, when you talked about your statements to the police,
Which one?
well, I'm getting there. When you talked about your statements to the police, the later one, the one on October 13th, was done well after you were out of the hospital, correct?
That's correct.
And that's the one where pretty much everybody seated over my left shoulder was there, correct?
That's not true.
Okay. Was Sergeant O'Hagan there?
Yes, he was.
Was Mr. Shea there?
Yes, he was.
Was Mr. Barker there?
Yes, he was.
Was your mom there?
Yes, she was.
Okay. And when you were at that interview, you were asked about this portion of the incident when you turn around and you see Stephen, right?
Yes.
And you told Detective O'Hagan at that time that, first off, that there were 3 to 4 guys, right?
That's what I believe I saw, yeah.
That's what you told Detective Hagan, right?
Correct.
O'Hagan. And you also told Detective O'Hagan that Stephen was on his back and that he was starting to sit up as the gun was recovered, correct?
Correct.
So your statement initially, on October 13th anyways, is that he has up to 4 guys on him, correct?
Roughly, yes.
And he's lying on his back, correct?
Correct.
And it's from that position, under those circumstances, that he's somehow able to recover his gun and fire it at you.
Correct.
Who were the 3 to 4 people who were there?
I don't recall. It seemed like a blurry shadow to me. I was just looking at Stephen Jones.
After you got up from kneeling or crouching with Mr. Brew and then stand up and you turn around, you also took a couple steps towards Stephen, correct?
That's correct.
As we discussed earlier, when you met with the prosecutors and the detective, you had a written statement that you had prepared before they arrived, correct?
Correct.
And you read that out to them, correct?
Correct, out loud.
And then they gave you some follow-up questions they asked you about, correct?
That's right.
You answered their questions, correct?
I did.
Did you answer those questions to the best of your abilities?
I did.
And then at the conclusion of that interview, you expressed concern that the information you gave the prosecutors and the detective was not matching or consistent with what they were expecting or what they envisioned.
I didn't say that.
Am I first a witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Exhibit 76. Please take a look at 76. Is that a transcript of your October 13, 2015 interview?
Yes, it is.
Please turn to page 20.
Okay.
Judge, I'm going to object to this. This calls for a hearsay. It wasn't Mr. Prado that said that.
Can you see that if I could, please?
Sure, Your Honor.
Where are you referring to, Mr. Davidson?
Page 20, line 5. It says Ms. Prado.
So it was your mother who expressed that concern.
Yes.
Your mother that you,
Objection, hearsay. I didn't hear a ruling on it.
it's already been answered, Judge.
The answer will stand, but any further reference to Ms. Prado's statement would be considered hearsay unless there's some exception.
And you had discussed the case with your mom prior to October 13th, 2015. You indicated that you told the prosecutors and the detective that you thought you heard a voice that heard like Mr. Mullen, but then you later walked that back?
Meaning I didn't know?
Did you testify earlier that after you told the prosecutors and the detective that you heard Michael Mullen's voice there, that you later indicated you weren't sure about that or otherwise walked that back?
Yes, sir.
Turn to page 18.
Okay.
Without saying what you heard Mike say, you did indicate that you heard a statement and it sounded like Mike Mullen, correct?
It sounded like, correct.
Okay. And then you later said it could have been Nick Peering because they sound alike, correct?
Correct.
So it was either Peering or Mullen, correct?
Correct.
So the fact that it could have been Mullen suggests that Mullen was somebody that you would have expected to be there that night, isn't it?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, if you had reason to believe or to know that Mr. Mullen wasn't there, you wouldn't have guessed his name first as the person whose voice you heard, would you?
No. I didn't know who was there.
Now, as you're standing on the courtyard side of the parking lot or the middle of the street or wherever it is you say that you now say that you were standing, you didn't have anything obstructing your view to the entrance area of the parking lot, correct?
That's correct.
There weren't any cars blocking your view, were there?
In the parking lot?
I'm
Or
asking about
in...
any objects between where you're standing and where this group of 5 to 10 people are.
No.
And did you see anybody get pushed?
No, I didn't.
Did you see anybody get punched?
No, I didn't.
When you ran up, did you throw any punches?
No, I did not.
You didn't punch anybody that night.
I don't recall punching anyone that night.
Well, is that something that you would remember if you did?
Yes.
And is your testimony that you did not punch anybody that night?
Correct.
We talked about Mike Mullen. He's in your fraternity, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Peering was also in your fraternity?
Correct.
Nick Acevedo is also a Delta Chi, isn't he?
Yes, correct.
Are you friendly with Nick Acevedo?
We're brothers.
And I take it from your other brother's testimony yesterday, that means you guys have an ironclad, tight relationship.
We're there for each other.
You implicitly trust each other.
We're always there for each other.
You guys have unmitigated devotion for each other, correct?
We love each other.
Okay. You're loyal to each other, aren't you?
Very loyal.
So there's really no reason then why Nick Acevedo would make something up that makes you look bad, is there?
There's no reason at all.
I'm going to object to that last statement, move to strike speculation.
Untimely, Your Honor.
Answer will stand.
Just a few more questions. So you essentially run across the street at some point after shots were fired or before shots were fired?
I don't recall.
You don't recall if you crossed the street before or after the shots were fired?
I don't recall. It was very hectic.
Do you recall where you were when you first realized that Colin was shot?
I was a good distance from him.
When you, whatever point in the sequence of events it was, Nick, when you ran across the street to go into the parking lot, you had already overheard things, without going into detail, that suggested to you that there was a gun there. Correct?
No, I wasn't aware of a gun at all.
You didn't hear anybody say anything about a gun prior to running across the street?
No, I did not.
You didn't hear anybody say anything about a gun as you entered the parking lot at Mountain View and ran towards Colin and Nick?
No, I just remember seeing the flashlight coming out of the parking lot.
You didn't hear anybody make a statement or ask a question about a gun?
No, I did not.
When you first saw the person you later determined to be Stephen Jones walking through the parking lot with the flashlight or the gun, you thought it was a police officer or a security guard, correct?
Correct.
You made that assumption based on the way the gun was being held, correct?
That's not true.
Well, didn't you tell the police that the gun was being held in a way that it looked like they were trying to disperse the situation?
I don't remember saying that.
Well, let's look again at your interview with the prosecutors and Detective O'Hagan.
Was that 70, which one? 75?
I believe so.
Do you know the page?
Page 9.
Thank you. I'm not finding it up here. It's at page 8.
You know, we may have different page numbers. I'm looking at the page from your interview with the prosecutors and Detective O'Hagan with the number 9 on the bottom in the middle. Can I approach and make sure?
Yes, go ahead.
75, right?
Page 9.
What page, counsel?
Exhibit 76, page 9. Okay?
Right.
You got that, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. You told the prosecutors and the police something different about why you made the assumption or why it looked like it was a police officer holding a flashlight, didn't you?
Objection vague. Different from what?
The objection's overruled. I'm going back on his previous question. Let's set this one up.
Didn't you tell the police that you remember just looking over at the flashlight? I'm not sure what it was. I don't know what they thought it was. In my opinion, it looked like a cop flashlight to me, so I figured it was a cop trying to break up the situation.
Right, that's what I said.
Okay. And told us before that you were trying to be honest with the prosecutors and the police, correct?
I was being honest with them.
And that was your opinion at the time then, that it looked like the gun was being handled by a police officer?
Objection,
or
it's
a-
flashlight.
Or that the flashlight was being held by a security guard or a police officer in a manner fashion to break up the situation, correct?
No, I just figured the light was a cop because it was really bright, and that's usually what cops do in a situation like that. I didn't see much because of the flashlight, so I can't get into detail, but the light was on.
But what we just read is what you told the prosecutors and the detective back on October 13th, correct?
Correct.
Now, in this interview, this October 13th interview, when these gentlemen were there and your mother was there, you also made the claim at that time that the light was shined on you, correct?
Correct.
And that's the first time you ever told the police that, isn't it?
Yes.
You never mentioned that to the police during your first interview at the hospital, correct?
Correct.
You never mentioned that to the police at your second interview at the hospital, correct?
Correct.
So it wasn't until after you met the prosecutors and the police and you typed up your statement that you read to him that you disclosed this blinding light was flashed at you, correct?
Correct.
When you came up on Colin and you saw that he was injured and he was bleeding, I think you said that you were shocked, correct?
Correct.
And that's understandable. He was a very good friend of yours, correct?
Yes.
Could I correctly assume that that would probably be one of the most upsetting things that had happened to you in your life?
By far.
You're in shock, you see your brother, he's seriously wounded, and you're thinking he's probably going to die, correct?
That's right.
You were totally distraught, correct?
That's right.
And at that moment, your thought was to turn around and look at the person behind you that may or may not be the shooter, just so you can describe him later on to the police? Was that your testimony this morning?
That's correct.
When you were participating in the October 13th, 2015 interview, you made some markings on a map for the detective to help illustrate what you were talking about, correct?
That's correct.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is Exhibit 74. Let's take a look at that.
Thank you.
Is that the map that you drew on for Sergeant O'Hagan?
Yes, it is.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate duplication of it?
Yeah,
Has the markings on it where you left them?
that's correct.
Move to admit 70. Is that 74? Sir?
If I could see it first, please. No objection.
74 is admitted.
Now you have still in front of you the transcript from that interview, correct?
Correct.
Let's turn to page 6.
I'm here.
Okay. And you see where you were asked, I believe by Sergeant O'Hagan, to put an N and a P on the map? Page 6, line 7.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also on page 9, you're asked to make a little circle, lines 12 through 13, you're asked to draw a little circle where you saw Mr. Jones, correct?
Correct.
And on this map, you also drew a circle of where the shooting occurred, correct?
To my knowledge, correct.
Permission to publish 74, Your Honor?
Sure.
Counsel, I have it to publish if you want. I think you turned it off, so it's going to take a minute. No, I think you turned it off. It's just rebooting right now.
Yes.
I do. I am.
You indicated to Sergeant O'Hagan by this circle that that's where you were, correct?
Correct.
And this is the circle here you drew to show where you saw Stephen approaching with the gun, correct?
To my knowledge, correct.
And this darker circle here is where you mark the location where Colin and Nick were observed, correct?
Now looking at it, I probably underestimated the distance that I ran to Colin.
Let me give you another chance to answer my question. When you wrote the markings on this map, this circle here was written to denote where you observed Nick and Colin when they were approached by Stephen, correct?
That's correct.
And you're telling this jury today that it's closer down here, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, during that interview, Sergeant O'Hagan even tried to give you an opportunity to move that circle down closer to the corner of the parking lot, didn't he?
That's correct.
And he did that when he asked you, so could it be possible that he was further down that ramp or in a different area, or is that just what you remember him being in that asphalt area? That's what he asked you, correct?
Correct.
And your response was, I remember him being in this general area right here, no further away, no closer. That's what
Correct.
you said, right?
At the time, yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Redirect.
Thank you. Dave, let's bring that Exhibit 74 up again. Let me ask you some questions. Follow up.
I only have 75 and 76.
I got it right here. We're going to publish it again. You see that?
I do.
All right, let me ask you some follow-up questions to what counsel just asked you about. When you put that little circle on the other side of Franklin near the courtyard, what time were you referring to?
I was referring to the time where I initially saw Perry and Kyle.
Okay, and you indicated you saw them close to the parking lot in that ramp area, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, that darker circle, is that the first time you recall seeing Nick Peering and Colin? When you were looking across the street?
That's correct.
Okay. So at a later point, did you recall, did you see Nick Peering and Colin Brew closer to that corner of the parking lot?
Check
Sustained.
What did you say earlier today about where Colin and Nick Peering were when you saw them get shot?
Down the ramp, more toward the Mountain View.
Okay, so I'm sorry to cut you off.
Down the ramp, more downward on the map.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, down here.
All right, down closer to the corner of that parking lot.
That's correct.
So are we getting a snapshot of what you were referring to earlier that during your observation period when you saw them?
Yes.
When you saw the defendant, or at the time the person with the light, where did you first see that person on this map?
On this map, the flashlight came from, like I said before, right here, the middle of the parking lot.
Okay. Now, is this the perspective you had, a bird's eye view that night?
No.
Does the scan we showed you earlier, 316, give you a better idea of where you were standing and what you were looking at?
Yeah, it does.
Counsel asked you about if you thought, why you thought that person was a cop. Remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Let's go to Exhibit 76 again. Page 9.
Okay.
Now, counsel asked you if you thought it was because of his stance. Now, I'm going to ask you on page 9, do you see anything there where you describe a stance?
No, I don't.
Okay. What you were referring to was that it looked like a cop flashlight. Is that 18?
Yes, sir.
So when you said it looked like a cop flashlight to me, so I figured it was a cop trying to break up the situation, what were you referring to?
I was referring to if it was a cop, he would be there to break up the situation.
All right. In other words, were you describing his actions, or were you describing the fact that it was a bright light?
A bright light. I do remember hearing that.
Was that before or after the shots?
I believe it was before.
Do you recall who said it?
I don't recall.
I guess that was a bad question. Do you know who said it?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Counsel asked you about your fraternity brothers. These are people that you love, right?
That's right.
Okay. Did you get together with your fraternity brothers and discuss what the narrative was going to be?
No, it was more of being there to help out each other and making sure we were okay and could make it through that rough time that we just
All right.
experienced.
I mean, did you know Stephen Jones before this occasion?
No, I had never
Yeah.
met him before in my life.
I'm sorry.
I had never seen him before.
All right, can you pull that up, the mic up? Sorry, I keep cutting you off because I can't hear that last part. So you didn't know him before this occasion?
No, I did not.
And did you have any reason to pin a murder on him?
No, I don't.
Let's go with the
Sorry,
bias, Judge.
just a second. What's your objection? Okay, approach.
I don't. Did he answer? I don't recall.
I thought he did.
Okay.
He said yes. I mean, he said he wouldn't.
He wouldn't.
No,
Okay.
you want to have
I
Steve
just
replay
sorry,
that back?
Steve. Could you? I was distracted. Thank you.
I heard him say, no, I don't.
Okay. So when you talked to myself, Sergeant O'Hagan, Mr. Shea on the 13th. Was that something that you got together after you spoke to people about the details of what happened?
No.
Was it different than what you told the police the day this happened, on the 9th?
Sustained.
No.
Just a
Sorry, he
second.
said sustained.
The witness's answer is stricken.
Was the fact that you saw this event, was that substantially different than what you told the police on the 9th?
Yeah, you're going to have to, I think, break that down.
All right, we'll break it down. We'll break it down. Thank you. Did you supplement additional information on the 13th than you provided to the police on the 9th?
No, I did not.
Did you give more information on the 13th than on the 9th, in other words?
Yes, I did.
Okay. On the 9th, can you describe to the jury where you were when you gave that statement to the police initially?
I was laying in a hospital bed. I had doctors cleaning and trying to look at my neck and figure out what was wrong.
Nick, sorry, just if you could pull the mic up.
I had doctors around me trying to clean out my neck and trying to see if I need anything else, really.
Were you being interrupted by medical personnel?
The objection's overruled.
There's a lot of people in the hospital when we were there. There's a lot of people running around.
Did you include every single detail about what happened in that first interview with the police?
No, I don't.
And
Did
why not?
Because I had just been shot, and I was in shock, and I did it to the best of my knowledge, but I'm probably sure that I left some stuff out due to my mental state at the time.
Okay. And let's go through that. Exhibit 75, do you still have that up there?
I do.
Okay. Now, counsel asked you about that light. I'm looking at page 1, lines 19 through 20. Do you have that up there?
I do.
Okay. Counsel asked you about that statement. I was across the street and a guy was shining a very, very bright flashlight at the Mountain View parking lot. And you started to say something, counsel interrupted you. What did you mean by that? What were you talking about in that moment?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel characterizing cross-examination.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'd have to go back to the record, gentlemen, and try and figure out whether or not it was an interruption.
We don't have to do that, Judge. I'll rephrase.
Go ahead, the objection sustained then.
What did you do, or what did you mean when you said, I was across the street and a guy was shining a very, very bright flashlight at the Mountain View parking lot? What were you talking about in that moment?
I was talking about the shooter coming out of the parking lot with a flashlight.
Okay. And counsel asked you if you ever said anything to the police on this first occasion about a light blinding you. Recall that question?
I do.
Okay. You did indicate, however, that it was a very, very bright flashlight at that point, didn't you?
Yes.
When the police talked to you, I'm still on Exhibit 75, page 1, lines 11 through 12, did he indicate that he just wanted to get a baseline from you real quick? Page 1, lines 11 and 12.
Your Honor, it's almost 10 lines up from where the responses are.
This is a different area, Judge.
Page 1 of 75.
Yes. Lines 11 and 12.
Can I see what you have here, please?
I think it's not right.
What was the page again, Mr. Barker?
Page 1, lines 11 and 12.
And what was the question preceding this?
Did the police ask him or tell him that he wanted to get a baseline from him real quick?
I don't think we're
Better
looking
take a
at
look at this.
I don't think we're looking at I think it might be backwards, is what he said earlier.
Yes. So that's in these, is this the,
Counsel's benefit, this is Bates 2430.
go ahead.
Okay. Isn't that what the police said to you?
Line
Lines 11 and
11
12?
through 12?
Yes. Okay. And then you gave some answers to questions he asked you following that. Is that right?
That's correct.
How many pages is that first portion of the interview? If you could just go to the back of that portion.
About 8 pages.
8 pages.
Yeah.
Was there more information that occurred than is contained in these 8 pages?
Definitely.
Did the police say, we want to get every single detail from you right now?
No, they did not.
And so you had a follow-up interview a few days later with myself, Sergeant O'Hagan, Mr. Shea, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's Exhibit 76. You had that in front of you?
I do.
Counsel asked you, I'm looking at page 18 now, lines 14 or 4. He asked you about Michael Mullen. Remember that?
I do.
Okay. And you indicated that you heard a voice that sounded like Michael Mullen. Did you actually see him there?
I did not see Michael Mullen.
Did you see him earlier that night?
I don't recall.
You were asked a question about if there were 3 or 4 people around the shooter. Were you focused on the people around the shooter or on the shooter himself?
The shooter.
Giving him an option, Judge. It's not leading.
Give me a chance to listen to the question first before I get argument. Steve, replay the question, please.
Did you see him earlier that night? You were asked a question about if there were 3 or 4 people around the shooter. Were you focused on the people around the shooter or on the shooter himself?
The objection is overruled.
The shooter.
Thank you. Sitting here today, can you say exactly how many people were around the shooter at that point?
I don't recall an exact number.
Was that your concern at the time, counting people?
No.
You were asked a series of questions about if you saw the defendant standing. Let me follow up on that.
Sure.
When you indicated that you saw the person standing, what time frame are we talking about?
Walking from the parking lot with the flashlight on toward Colin and Nick.
Okay. So he wasn't crawling across the parking lot. He was walking, to your perspective?
That's correct.
When did you see him to be able to identify him?
When I turned around and looked at him, he was about 5 to 10 feet from me.
All right. And counsel asked you how long it was that you looked at him. You indicated to the police that it was a glimpse. Recall that?
I do.
What does a glimpse mean to you?
A couple seconds.
And in fact, you were able to identify him to the police on the 9th, weren't you?
That's right.
Let's go to page 3. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but Exhibit 75. Page 3. Counsel asked you on lines 2 and 3 if you were asked if you could describe him. You said, no, it was a bright flashlight. I want to ask you about the very next page, page 4. Lines 5 through 10, do you give a physical description of the shooter at that point?
I do.
and you say, I got a glimpse of the guy who shot him. He was on the ground. I don't know why. He seemed like he was tan, had brown eyes, black hair, kind of longish hair, maybe down to his eyebrows. Is that what you said?
That's correct.
Counsel asked you about when that light hit you and you were blinded. I just want to clarify, where do you recall you were when that light was shining in your face?
Across the street at that point from the courtyard, around that general area. I don't recall exactly where.
I'm sorry, you kind of trailed off.
I don't recall exactly where, but it was by across the street from the courtyard.
All right, thank you. Counsel asked you about Acevedo, Nick Acevedo, and where he was. When did you first see him?
When I was holding Colin.
All right. Do you know if he was there before you?
I don't.
Do you know if he had come after you?
I don't. I maybe close to the same time. I don't know if he was before or after me. I was just looking at Colin.
At any rate, you saw him at some point with Colin.
Correct.
We go to Exhibit 316 again. All right, you see that, Nick?
I do.
So this is a little different perspective than what we looked at before. Do you agree?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. From this perspective, can you identify where you believe the shooter was when you saw him shoot Colin and Nick Peering?
Yeah, right about this area.
All right, and you're indicating kind of near where that
Near
blocked
the
out lane
third-
is?
Near that third, kind of underneath the third triangle from the left.
All right, thank you. And where was Colin from this perspective when you saw him get shot?
Colin was right here.
And Nick Peering?
Nick Peering was on the other side of the bushes and then jumped over them.
Thank you. You have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
Thank you, Nick. That's all I have.
Thank
I'll
you.
turn to members of our jury and see if they have any questions for this witness. Looks like we do. I'll see counsel and court reporter at sidebar. Do have some questions for you. Would it be fair to say, after looking back on that night, that your state of shock could have been triggered at the time of seeing Colin?
Definitely.
The next question is neurological damage or memory impairment.
No, it did not.
The next question is, when you reported that you were down helping Colin, did something catch your attention that made you turn around from helping Colin to look at the shooter?
Not really anything that grabbed my attention. It was more like me just wanting to know my surroundings and wanting to know where I was at. And
You stated that you thought the flashlight in the parking lot was an approaching security guard. Besides the brightness of the light, why would you think a security guard would be approaching the group gathered?
because only a cop would have a flashlight that bright and be shining it at people.
Follow up, Mr. Barker.
Just briefly on that first question, Nick, asking about if your shock was triggered when you saw Colin. As time has passed and you've been able to look back on the situation, have you had a good memory or can you recall what happened that night?
Yes, sustained.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm not going to allow him to do it. I sustained the objection.
It's hard to get used to these rules. Let me ask you a different question. At this time that you were in shock with Colin, seeing Colin there, did that change anything about what you perceived afterwards being something you can recall today?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I don't think I understand my question either.
Yeah.
Let me ask it another way.
Okay.
The question was, fair to say the state of shock was triggered at the time you saw Colin there. My question is, does that you saw Colin? So, for instance, can you still recall today what happened after you saw Colin on the ground?
I mean, I was able to identify the shooter, so yes, I was able.
All right. Thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Think further, Mr. Davis.
Very briefly, just following up on the last question about the flashlight, to turn around and look at the issue from the other side, there was nothing about the way the light was being handled that suggested it was being done by somebody who was in a amped up state or somebody who was worked up or acting recklessly, correct?
That's hard to tell. It's a flashlight.
Well, you
That's
didn't
all
s-
it was.
For example, you didn't see it abruptly moving up and down, side to side, as if somebody was running, correct?
I don't know. It was very bright.
Did you see it moving in jagged motions?
Not that I recall.
No further questions.
All right. This witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Prado, thank you for your testimony. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, jury.
Can I see counsel up here, please? Disregard that comment, please. All right, folks, I pushed you pretty hard, so let's take a 20-minute recess. Please remember the admonition. We'll get back together at 3:30. 20 minutes.
Are you still cool, Marie? 'Cause I'm